In this lesson, we're going to talk about import statements, modules, and packages. Import datetime, import random, and import pandas as PD. These are the import statements that we're going to talk about in detail in this lesson. Each of these import statements imports a Python module that we can then use in our VS Code editor. If you've already got some experience in programming, perhaps in other languages, the easiest way to think about Python modules is as frameworks or libraries. This is what they're going to be called in other languages. When you actually click on the Explorer tab here, then you're going to see that our Python file is actually a .py file. And the simple way to think about Python module is that every file that ends with .py is actually a Python module. And by importing a module, we get access to the variables and the functions inside the file that was imported. In other words, importing gives us access to a .py file content. So to illustrate, I'm gonna create a new Python file. Let's call it life, and then append a .py extension, and then hit enter. Now that we've got our Python file created, let's create a variable called the answer and set it equal to the number 42. Then all you need to do is to press Command plus S or Control plus S if you are on a Windows computer to save your code, or click on File here, then make sure autosave is selected. Now that we've created our Python script as a .py file to our programs folder, then we can start using it. Back to our app.py file, we can write import life. Now, because I have an irrational love of data types, let's actually check out the type of this thing called life. So I'm gonna write print, then say type, and then put life in between the parentheses. When I run the code, then we find out that our life.py file, when we imported it, is called a module. So here comes the really cool part. We are actually going to access the code inside our life module. So we're gonna say life.theAnswer. Then I'm gonna store it in a variable called value. Finally, we're gonna print our value and then hit the run button. How cool is that? I think this is super cool, right? It's like our Python file has finally made a new friend. But let's take a second to think about what this line of code actually means. It actually means we are fetching the value of the answer that lives inside the module called life. And the thing to note here is the Python syntax. We've accessed the variable inside life.py file using the dot notation. In other words, we've accessed the answer by writing life.theAnswer. And this dot notation will come up again and again as we progress throughout the course. So now that we've just created our own module and then imported it in our file, let's take a look at this code right here. Import datetime and also import random. Well, in this case, we actually didn't have to create any .py files. We just wrote import datetime and then it worked. So how is it that we can actually do that? See, I used to think it was magic, but then sadly I discovered that it was in fact not a magic, because it turns out that when we install Python on our computer, a whole bunch of modules were already included in our installation. And this is why there was no need for us to create any datetime or random.py files to our project folder, because Python already knew about datetime and random. But the question is, what kind of other modules that Python already knew about? So let's take a look together at what kind of modules we have access to out of the box from installing Python. We can get hold of this information in various places. The first place we're going to check is the Python documentation. So here are the modules that are built into Python language itself. And this built-in modules is also the so-called Python standard library. And however, there are over 200 modules here. Scrolling around here, we can see that there is one module called math. So let's take a closer look at this math module. Well, the math module is something that you can use to do all sorts of calculations. And this module actually has information on two things, namely the value of pi and the number e. So as a challenge, can you import the math module to your code editor? And after you've imported the math module, write the Python code to print the value of pi on the console. And after that, write some more code to print out the value of e as well. I will give you a few seconds to pause the video and give this a go. And here is the solution. So just like we've imported datetime, we simply write import math. And to get the value of pi, I can write math.py. Then print the value of pi. Then hit the run button. And here is the value of pi from the math module. And looking at the official Python documentation, we can see that we can access the value of e using the code right here. So in my code editor, this means I can simply write print math.e and also run the code to complete the final part of the challenge. That's pretty cool, right? So using the math module and the dot notation, we can access any of the variables inside the module through their name. And this is exactly the same syntax that we used earlier when we created our own .py file, and access the answer by writing life.theanswer. And this shows that we can access a lot of code from other modules, like the math module, using the same dot notation. Now let's take a look at this import statement. Import pandas as PD. Well, this import statement that you just wrote with pandas is a little bit more complex than the one we wrote with import math or import life. So the pandas import statement had something a little extra. We wrote import pandas as PD, and Python is highlighting the as in orange color. However, the syntax highlighting is telling us that the as in this line is a Python keyword. So what does this as PD actually does, and why is it there? So the answer is, all what as PD is actually doing is giving us an alias to the import statement. So why do we actually need an alias? Well, when you think about it, the module math only has 4 letters, and you don't need a lot of typing because it's pretty short. But this module pandas has about 6 characters. So we actually don't want to type out 6 or more characters every time we are referring to pandas. So instead, we wrote import pandas as PD. And this created a variable called PD, which referenced our pandas module and allowed us to use a short name instead. So PD became the alias for pandas. And we can call it anything we wanted, by the way. We can even call it Shuaib or you. So now that we've talked a little bit about the ask keyword to create an alias, let's actually put it into practice so that it really sinks into our memory. We're going to use the ask keyword with our life module. So check this out. If we write import life as Shuaib, and when I run the code, then we get a name error. Name life is not defined. And this is because we also have to update the code here. And the reason is that we can no longer refer to this module as life because we've given it an alias called Shuaib. So when I type in Shuaib and then rerun the code, then our error now disappears. Now I hope this exercise made it a bit more clear as how the ask keyword works in practice. So let's talk about another kind of import statement in Python. When I say from life import the answer, then I will delete this code right here and write print, then pass in the answer. And when I run the code, then I still get the value 42 that lives inside our life module. Now, a very reasonable question that you will probably want to ask at this point is that, how is this different from the other import statement? And why are there three ways of importing things? Can't we just keep things simple? Well, the three import statements are all doing very similar things. And the reason I'm showing you these three ways of doing things is because people out there in the world are using these three ways of importing modules in their Python code. And the difference to the other import statement that we've used earlier is that in this case, we are copying out the answer from our life.py file. The answer is now its own variable inside our Python code because we've just made a copy of it, and this means we can also do stuff with it. So for example, we can create another variable called name and set its value to the string Softlinks. Back to app.py, I can say from life import name and then print out the value of name. Then when we run the code, we see that Softlinks has been printed out on the console. So in summary, the from keyword copies out Softlinks as name from our life module and then makes it accessible as a variable inside our current Python file. Now we are slowly coming to the end of this lesson on modules, packages, and imports. And we've covered quite a few import concepts here. So let's review them before we move on. We've learned that Python scripts live inside files ending with .py. And we also saw how we can import existing code as a Python module into our Python code using this import statement. We saw that there are a couple of different ways we can import a module in Python. The simplest way is just to import and then the name of the module. So for example, import math. The next level up was using the ask keyword in the import statement. So in this case, we import the module, but we create an alias as the new name of our module. And we use this name to refer to it later. Finally, we saw how we can use the from keyword to copy out a specific piece of code from another module. And this is what we did to get from life import the answer. So at this point, I suspect that you've probably already started to see the power of this import statement and how they are a massive game changer, because by importing a module, we can use other people's code, and this saves us work from having to write the code ourselves. So on that note, I'll see you in the next lecture. Take care.